Hi, thank you for coming back. Tonight we have Dr. Timothy Howe, who is going to be speaking with us about osteoporosis. And I know that that's a subject that we hear a lot about. Thankfully, there's some things that we can do, to help prevent it. And thank you for being here, Dr. Howe.
So we have a handout for you. I will say that osteoporosis, there's a lot of difference in what's recommended, and that's because things have changed. And it was good for me to review this again because things have changed again. Osteoporosis affects 20 to 25% of women and 4% of men over 50, and that's a large portion of the population. But if you're thin, it can affect up to 67% of women. So that's 2/3 of thin women. And so don't get too thin. If you do carry a lot of weight around in a bag or something, that'll help. You can come help my wife chop wood, that helps, or stack it. You could say that osteoporosis is a disease that affects people that don't work hard enough. You need to carry weight, and when you're overweight, your bones are better, but your cancer rate goes up, your diabetes rate goes up, your heart disease rate goes up, and your stroke goes up. So don't say to yourself, well, I'm thin, my bones are bad, so I'm going to gain 100 pounds. That'll help your bones, but it's not good. It's not the right way to go. The total cost of osteoporotic fractures in the U.S. in 2018 was $57 billion. That's a lot of money. Vitamin D supplementation is recommended for osteoporosis if your blood level is below 20. There's not a lot of research that shows that repleting vitamin D helps bones. It does cut fracture risk, but it doesn't seem to reverse osteoporosis. Why is that? Well, if your level is low, really low, you can get weakness. And if you're weak, then you'll fall more. And if you fall more, you're going to get more fractures. That was proven very nicely in a study of women in a nursing home. What they did is they took a group of women in nursing homes and they put foam pads in their underwear. And just doing that, they cut hip fracture rates by 40%. That's better than most medicines for osteoporosis. So it is the fall that causes the fracture, and if you're low in vitamin D, your muscle strength isn't as good and you're more liable to fall. I had a patient some years ago who was a welder, and he never went outside. His skin was as white as the paper. And he came in and he said, I don't know what's wrong. I can't squeeze the handle on my welder anymore to get the welding stick in it. And he was profoundly weak, so I measured his vitamin D level, it was 4. So we repleted his vitamin D, and within a month he had a great hand grip. So that's probably the mechanism by which vitamin D supplementation reduces fracture risk, not a direct effect on the bones, although they're often connected. There's no evidence that repleting vitamin D above 20, which is the lower limit of normal, helps the bones at all. If you get too much vitamin D, you'll get hypercalcemia or high calcium, and that can be a problem. And you can get kidney stones as well. So be careful about excess repletion of vitamin D. You probably heard a lot about vitamin D in COVID. Did you hear about that, and how we want you to take lots of vitamin D because people that have higher vitamin D levels have lower risk of dying from COVID? probably had nothing to do with the vitamin D. It was a marker for sunlight exposure. And sunlight exposure gives you not only the ultraviolet light, which produces vitamin D, but it gives you near infrared light, which lowers the inflammatory markers in your blood. It actually increases production of melatonin in the mitochondria, and melatonin is a potent antioxidant. Yes, it helps you sleep at night, but you get it from the sun during the day made in your mitochondria. And it was probably reduction in inflammation through production of melatonin by sunlight that vitamin D was a marker for, and not the vitamin D that lowered the risk of COVID. That was kind of an aside, but we won't charge you extra for that. So vitamin D is important for health, but is not really going to help if you take super amounts of it for your bones. The calcium intake that's recommended in our country today is 1,200 milligrams. Interestingly, in the United Kingdom, they only recommend 700 milligrams. Well, how much do you actually need? Well, that's debatable, as you might guess. But there's a big difference between 700 and 1,200. And probably 700 is closer to the truth. In America, we tend to think if a little good's a lot's better. And they're a little more conservative in the UK, and they came up with 700 milligrams of calcium a day. That's a recommended allowance. More than this does not help reduce osteoporosis risk. In fact, you've got some problems if you take calcium as a supplement. If you get it in your food, you get one effect. If you get it as a supplement, you get another effect, as we'll see. Calcium supplementation increases the risk of kidney stones. The more you take, the higher the risk. And it appears to increase the risk of heart attack and stroke. That's supplementation. But if you get it in your food, it doesn't raise the risk of stroke or the risk of heart attack. Why is that? Well, we don't really know, but it's the same in multiple areas. If you have a high intake of vitamin A in your diet, you have a low risk of cancer. If you take vitamins that have vitamin A in them, you have a high risk of cancer. And we find this multiple times when we supplement. Get your nutrients in your food whenever possible. And that's played out over and over again, and is also true with osteoporosis. There's a little section in your handout. It says this: if 1,000 people supplemented with 1,200 milligrams of calcium daily, they estimate that you would prevent 26 fractures. But interestingly, those are not fractures of the hip. They're other fractures, like of your forearm or your elbow or your humerus or your ribs. But calcium supplementation does not appear to reduce hip fractures. But you would cause 14 heart attacks, and 10 strokes, and 13 deaths. How many of you want to supplement calcium? No, it's better to get it in your food with those kind of data. And hip fracture actually appears to go up with supplementation, but not with dietary calcium. So again, get your calcium in your food, except for one thing, and that's where the title of tonight's presentation came from, and that has to do with milk, which we're going to come to. All right, so here's a few other things to keep in mind. Taking a proton pump inhibitor, what's that? Nexium, Prilosec or omeprazole, pantoprazole or Protonix, those are proton pump inhibitors. They reduce the acid in the stomach, and if you reduce the acid in the stomach, you're not going to absorb the calcium from your diet as well. So if you're taking those, you're at higher risk for osteoporosis because you don't absorb calcium well from your diet. Loop diuretics like furosemide and torsemide and bumetanide increase the risk of osteoporosis. That's because of their effect on calcium in the kidneys. However, the thiazide diuretics reduce the risk of kidney stones, and they don't seem to worsen osteoporosis. Now, some people, because of heart problems, have to take loop diuretics. But if you do, you're at a higher risk for osteoporosis, and you may want to spend some extra time exercising. Corticosteroids, that's like prednisone or hydrocortisone, they increase the risk of osteoporosis, and if you take those for any length of time, make sure that someone is looking at your bone density. All right, the first line of treatment for osteoporosis is bisphosphonates. That's like alendronate or Fosamax, racindronate, and several others. One that's IV you can get as well. The brand name for that is Reclast. Those are all bisphosphonates, and side effects of bisphosphonates, if you take them orally, include esophagitis and esophageal perforation. That's rare if you take them appropriately. And the way you take them appropriately is first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, followed by 2 large glasses of water. You want to wash them through the esophagus so they don't sit there and make a hole through your esophagus. Those are also associated with osteonecrosis of the jaw. You can have real problems. Your teeth can fall out. Now, you took them for your bone density, and now your teeth fall out. That's not good. That's rare as well. It's more common in those with compromised dentition. And if you're not taking calcium, and this is when I do recommend calcium supplements, although somewhat hesitantly, but you should make sure you're getting enough calcium if you're taking bisphosphonates, because they can cause hypocalcemia, low calcium, if you're not. So that's the one time when you got to be sure you're getting the full amount of calcium when you're taking bisphosphonates. And in fact, if you go to get IV Reclast, before you go, you have to have your calcium measured, your kidney function measured, and your vitamin D level, you have to have that measured, or at least be taking vitamin D so that you don't have a problem from the IV bisphosphonate. All right, osteoporosis is a problem, but as I said, it's a problem not of calcium deficiency usually, or vitamin D deficiency usually. It's a problem of inadequate weight-bearing exercise. Your bones are a crystalline structure, and as such, they have a property called the piezoelectric effect. If you take a crystal and you compress it, it gives off an electrical current. And the bones do that. And so when you compress the bone by jumping like that, they give off an electric current, and that electric current leads to the deposition of calcium in the bones. So the more we load the bones, the more we compress that crystalline structure, the more calcium is laid down. I see this when I do x-rays of the forearms of lobstermen. What do they do all day? They haul traps. And the traps, when they're dry, weigh about 40 pounds. And they brace their knee against the side of the boat and muckle onto the traps and haul them up. And if you x-ray the forearms of a lobsterman, their bones look like the leg bones of most of us. I mean, they're just great, big, huge. And why? Because they're loading those bones all the time, all day long. They're pulling the traps overboard, on board, and then throwing them off again. So high intensity resistance and impact training. This is a study that was done down in Australia, and they took women who all had osteoporosis and they had them do several exercises. That included deadlifts. Do you know what a deadlift is? Yep. That's where you have a barbell on the floor, you bend over, and you pick it up to here. And then down it goes again. That's a deadlift. And then they had them do lifts like this, up. And they had 5 repetitions of each one and then 5 sets. And then they had them do squats with the barbells back here where you load it and down you go. And these were all elderly women with osteoporosis. So don't say, well, I'm 80, I don't think I could do it. They adjusted the weight for your maximum. And then the last thing they did was they had them do a chin-up. They put a bar here so that their arms were at 90 degrees and like here. And they had them do a chin-up jumping. They jumped up and pulled up at the same time. So if you can't do a pull-up, don't worry, you get to jump. It's a kind of a cheat. So you go like this, and then while you're holding onto the bar, they dropped to the floor like that and tried to get maximum impact when dropping about that far. They found that after 8 months, all of them had built bone. They'd built significant bone doing that, and that was 2 sessions a week. Well, that's good. You can build bone that way. I've had many of my patients take bisphosphonates, and what I can tell them is, well, you didn't lose more bone. But very, very infrequently can I tell them, great, you built some bone. But this study showed definitively that you can build bone if you stress the bones. Question?
So walking isn't enough?
Walking is not enough. Mm-hmm. It won't do it. In fact, the control group walked and they lost bone density. And that's really important to understand. Weight-bearing exercise is critical, but walking's not enough. You've got to put a load on the bones.
But walking is good.
Walking is good. Walking is good for lots and lots of things, and it will help prevent falls and reduce fracture risks that way, but it is not going to build bone. You can't get there by walking. I don't know that anyone's done a study on jogging, because with jogging there's more impact, but if you really want to build bone, you've got to lift weights. Miriam Nelson showed that years ago in her study at Tufts University. She wrote the book Strong Women Stay Young, and showed a similar thing. But this is a fairly simple program, and so if you have osteoporosis, as you'll see in my recommendations, I recommend you go to a gym and find a trainer that knows about this study, and if they don't know about it, you can look it up online and show it to them and say, I need to do these things. I want to build my bone. And you can build bone this way. And I think it's probably the most important take-home from the lecture tonight is osteoporosis. If you've got it, you need to stress your bones more. But you need to do it safely so you don't break a bone. And in the study, there were no adverse outcomes from the exercise. You think, man, I don't want to jump, and what about my knees? And they didn't have a problem. Question?
What's the difference between jumping up and down and lifting weights?
Jumping up and down would be good. Lifting weights loads the spine a little bit better. And when we think about osteoporosis, we think primarily of hips and spine. And if you do squats here, that's going to help. The other thing that helps with weightlifting is, what are you strengthening? The muscles you need to not fall. So we want to prevent fractures by strengthening bones and also strengthening muscles so that you keep your core strong. Keeping your core strong really helps prevent falls. And remember, it's falls that cause the fracture. That's important to keep in mind. If you never fell, you could have featherweight bones and not have a problem, except if you're lifting, because lifting is a problem if you don't use proper technique, because you can get a wedge fracture of your spine just from lifting. All right, a few other things here. Osteoporosis then results not from a deficiency of bisphosphonates, but from inadequate bone stress, and also, in all of us, from as we age, our hormone levels drop. That's inevitable, but you can fight back against that with exercise. I recommend, instead of doing some of the things like bisphosphonates, that you exercise and take prunes. Prunes have been shown to reduce the osteoporosis, of all things. You say, how can prunes do it? They don't have a lot of calcium in them. That's right, they don't, but they are a rich source of antioxidants. And what we know is the more antioxidants you get in your diet, the less inflammation you have. And inflammation is a very potent cause of osteoclast activity, and so you're eating your bones faster from inflammation. So again, you want those purple potatoes, you want those deep red colors, you want the prunes. Anytime you decrease inflammation, you're going to slow osteoporosis. Almonds are interesting because they are not only a source of calcium, but they also have a substance in them that when you eat them, it decreases osteoclast activity. So you have osteoblasts that build up the bone, and osteoclasts with a C that eat up the bone. So you want the blasts with a B to be building, and you want the clast with a C to be quiet. Osteoblast versus osteoclast. And almonds downregulate osteoclast activity. Actually, that study was done in David Jenkins' lab in Canada, where he had people eat a handful of almonds. Then about 2 hours later, he drew blood from them and dripped it on a osteoclast, a group of osteoclasts in a petri dish, and showed that that blood from almond eaters decreased osteoclast activity. Fascinating study. Jenkins is a great researcher and does some interesting things. All right, so here's milk intake. All right? The lecture was named after this, but I didn't want to give you just a couple studies, so I waited till now. Fascinating. This is you can look up the reference for this. I put it there. They followed 96,000 women for 22 years and found an increase in hip fracture rates associated with milk intake. So how many want to drink milk for their bones? Now, I mean, 96,000 women for 22 years, that's pretty conclusive. They found an increase in hip fracture rates. Likely this was related to the presence of galactose, which may worsen osteoporosis. And it's known to accelerate aging. In fact, they give galactose to laboratory animals so that they'll age and they can study the effect of aging. So don't drink milk for your bones, all right? We're not done there because it's galactose is the problem. Yogurt intake was associated with reduced fracture rates, likely because it's low in galactose, because the bacteria, like lactobacillus, they eat the lactose, get rid of the galactose, then you don't have that negative effect. There's also some effect of the protein in milk causing an acidification of the system, and then you, with acid, you have to buffer the acid in your urine with calcium, and so you get osteoporosis from excess protein intake as well. But it looks like galactose is the major thing because milk worsens bone density, but yogurt doesn't. Interesting.
Kefir be the same?
Pardon?
Would kefir be?
Kefir's the same. Anything that's had lactobacillus active in it, splitting or eating up the galactose. Dairy intake, however, that's not just milk, it's yogurt too. Dairy intake, however, was associated with increased rates of heart disease, cancer, and death during the study. In fact, 3 glasses of milk a day nearly doubled the risk of death during the study. One way to avoid osteoporosis is just to die before it happens. But I'd rather not do that.
Would ice cream be part of the milk?
Sure, it's dairy, and it will increase your risk of premature death if you get enough of it. But it'd be a sweet death, right?
Yep.
Okay, well, just think about it. All right, here's where I mention inflammation on the second page. And colorful fruits and vegetables, that's what you want. Not an antioxidant in a pill form. It doesn't work nearly as well. Get your antioxidants in your food, and you'll do a lot better. All right, one more thing, and that is glycation. I've talked about glycation many times in this lecture series. That's where sugar attaches irreversibly to protein and fat and DNA. And the higher your sugar intake, or the higher your tissue or blood sugar level is, the faster and the more glycation takes place. So if you look at diabetics, they tend to have a higher bone density. Why? Well, because they're, by and large, type 2 diabetics are overweight. So their bone density is higher, and you'd think, great, they're going to have a lower fracture risk. No, they have a higher fracture risk. How does that work? If I had a crystal vase in this hand and a plastic vase in this hand, which would have greater density? Crystal or plastic? Crystal. But if I drop them, which is going to break? Crystal. But it's denser. That points out this. Bone density is an indicator of bone strength, but it is not the same as bone strength, right? And one of the problems is if you glycate the collagen, you stiffen it and make it more brittle. So here you have a dense bone in a diabetic, but it's more brittle. They're more likely to have a fracture because they've glycated the collagen. If you glycate a red blood cell, like diabetics do when we measure their hemoglobin A1C, the red cell only lives for about 3 months, and then you get another go. But collagen sticks around a lot longer, and if you glycate that, it's several years before you may turn it over, or longer. And so if you're diabetic and your hemoglobin A1C or your collagen glycation is high, your bones are going to be more brittle, and even though they're dense. So do whatever you can to keep your glycation level low. How do you do that? You do that by eating a high fiber diet with not many refined carbohydrates. And one other thing, you eat your food low temperature cooked, because you can glycate the food before you eat it. Remember that? If you take a baked potato and cook it, it has 17 kilounits of aged products, that's glycated end products per 100 grams. Whereas if you French fry it, high temperature with the oil, it has 1,544. If you take chicken and boil it, add a little lemon, which slows down the glycation process, it has about 900 kilounits of aged products, or glycated end products. But if you fry it, it's 9,000, and if you barbecued it, it's 18,000. So if it's in your food and you eat it, you're going to get those glycated end products into your system as well. But the major problem is refined carbohydrates and the glycation that results from them. Both are a problem. So recommendations: get adequate calcium in your food, avoid supplementation unless you're on a bisphosphonate when you may have to take it. 2, get adequate vitamin D, but no clear benefit to your bones as long as your level is at least 20. So get sunshine when you can. And remember, we don't have many more days that we can make vitamin D here in Maine. So if you're going to supplement vitamin D, now's a good time to start, and then you stop around March and start getting out in the sun again when you can make vitamin D again. 3, you need high impact and resistance exercise to treat osteoporosis. This is best done first with a trainer. Once you get it set up, you can do it at home, you can do it anywhere, or you can come help me carry wood. That'll work. I've got next year's to cut. This year's is all done. 4, eat a high diet that's high in veggies and fruit to reduce inflammation. Try prunes instead of calcium supplementation. That'll keep you regular too, right? Okay. 5, avoid milk if you use dairy. It should be yogurt for any benefit to your bones. Okay? Milk is not going to help your bones. We know that clearly from that study.
Ever since I went to school, milk was pushed.
Yeah.
From early
Why
age.
was it pushed?
The dairy industry.
That's right.
Now, is there a difference between having milk early in your life?
We thought so for many years. We thought that it would be a help in the teenage years, and indeed the peak bone mass is a little bit higher if they have dairy intake in the teen and preteen years, but you lose that if you continue to take the milk. And part of the reason is we lose the enzyme lactase as we age, but galactose is still a problem. 6, minimize glycation by eating food high in fiber and low temperature cooked. 7, use bisphosphonates if you cannot do high resistance and impact training. If you can exercise, if you can find someone to help you have a program, that's going to be better. And for lots of reasons.
So, as an adjunct to the high resistance training, like in the yoga world, one of the recommendations, that my understanding is that if you hold the poses longer, like it lowers the bones. So like if you were doing some standing balancing poses or warrior poses or things like that, a recommendation that I understood was a minute to hold it that look.
Yeah, anytime you stress the bones, you're going to help them. But you really want that compression that comes with impact and weights if you're trying to build bones. I'm sure that yoga is great for preventing fractures because you're going to improve your balance. And it's probably good for slowing the loss of bone, calcium or bone density, but it probably is not strong enough to build bone, just like walking isn't. Walking's great, please walk. You know there's a direct correlation between the size of the muscles in your thigh and the size of your brain? Yeah. Interesting. Why? Because the more active you are, the more blood you pump. In fact, when you walk or jog, about a third of your blood is pumped by your legs with the muscular contraction, pumps the blood around, and that gets blood to your brain. And if you get blood to your brain isn't going to shrink from cell death. That's what what happens with dementia is you get cells dying up there and the brain shrinks. So keep your thighs nice and, not just big because you can get them big from fat, but keep the muscles big and your brain will stay big. So if you want to measure someone's IQ, just get a tape measure, you know, and check those thighs. Yeah. Okay. And then here's a list of calcium-rich foods that are not dairy. Beans. Soy gets all the press, but beans generally are high in calcium. Almonds, and you get two benefits from almonds. You get you slow down the osteoclast activity, and you get the calcium. Sesame seeds are very rich in calcium, 1,800 milligrams of calcium per cup. Now, who's going to sit down and eat a cup of sesames? Not me, but they're rich in calcium. And then you have chia and flax seeds. Greens, broccoli and kale are the best because they're low in oxalate, and oxalate complexes calcium. But if you cook the greens, oxalate levels drop. They can drop by up to 60 to 80%. So greens generally are a good source of calcium. Any questions? Question, Jess?
Yeah, you mentioned getting vitamin D from the sun, but if you have skin cancer and you're slathering yourself in sunscreen all the time, it keeps you getting it back.
Right, you know, that's a problem, but I'd rather you get skin cancer than internal cancer. And sunshine, well, people that get skin cancer are at lower risk for internal cancers. So it's kind of a trade-off. What you want to avoid most of all is sunburns. And the skin cancer you're getting at your age is not from the sun that you got yesterday. It's from the sun you got when you're a teenager. And I can't fix that now. Melanoma is not related to sun exposure per se. It's related to burns, skin damage. So avoid burns at all costs. And
What about squamous cell?
squamous cell is definitely related to sun exposure, so is basal cell. But those usually don't kill you. It's really rare for a squamous cell of your skin to kill you. It gives the dermatologists and the surgeons lots of money, but they need it. And, you know, it cuts you up a bit, but it doesn't kill you. And so I say sunshine is good for you. Avoid burns and don't get too dark a tan, and choose an area of your body that hasn't had a lot of sun exposure and get sun there. And then, you know, those are areas that most people don't see. And so I'd like to see all backless dresses and shirts for men that have a cutout in the back. Because if you get a skin cancer there, who cares? You got plenty of extra skin back there.
I have a brother in Florida. We live in Maine. Can you tell me, do we really have to worry about the sun in Maine?
Yeah, you still do, but not nearly as much. Interestingly, if you draw a line right down the Mason-Dixon line, the people south of that have less cancer than the people north of that. Probably vitamin D related and sunshine related. So I'm not recommending you move to Florida now. Wait until the hurricane season's over at least. It almost is. But get sunshine whenever you can is what I say, but don't get a burn. And use sunscreen on your face and on your ears, or wear a big hat. That's even better. But let some of your other skin show if you want vitamin D. Question?
Do you think there's any difference really in regular just yogurt and Greek yogurt?
I don't know. I think they're both fine for the bones because the lactose is eaten by the bacteria. But I don't think for your bones it makes a difference.
Would soy yogurt be beneficial?
Soy yogurt is not going to be more beneficial than beans because it doesn't. Soy milk doesn't have lactose in it. But the probiotics in it are certainly good for you. So sure, have some. Soy yogurt, almond yogurt, oat yogurt, I don't care. They're all fine. Yeah. Cheryl.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Hopefully that was helpful.
Thanks you guys for coming out, and we'll see you next month.